He rode into town with dust on his boots and a crying baby in his arms, a millionaire cowboy stripped of everything but hope. What happened next will break your heart and heal it too. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and tell me, where are you watching from? Let's get started. He rode into town with dust on his boots, guilt in his eyes, and a baby crying in his arms. No one knew his name anymore, not really. They just whispered it like a ghost that had come back from the dead. They called him the Millionaire Cowboy. No one expected him to return. Not after the fire. Not after the storm that took his wife and burned half his land to ashes. But here he was, standing on Main Street under the dying sun, clutching his infant daughter, her cries slicing through the quiet evening air like a broken fiddle string. The townsfolk stared. Some pitied him. Others turned away, pretending not to see the man who had once ruled the valley with more money, more cattle, and more pride than anyone within 100 miles. He'd lost everything, except that baby. And now, that baby was dying. The doctor in town had closed his doors 2 winters ago. The saloon was open, the church still held prayers on Sundays, but no one could help a crying baby who hadn't had milk in 2 days. The child's lips were pale, her tiny fingers weak against his shirt. He knocked on every door that had light behind it. Mrs. Beavers, the storekeeper's wife, peeked through her curtain and said softly, "I'm sorry, Mr. Grant. I got none to give." The widow Thompson crossed herself and shut her door before he could speak. By the 5th door, he stopped knocking. His boots dragged through the dirt road as he looked toward the edge of town, toward that small, quiet house near the cottonwood trees. The one everyone ignored. The one that belonged to the woman who never spoke more than a whisper. Her name was Clara Hensley. And if the town had its stories, Clara was the chapter no one read out loud. She lived alone, tending to a small garden and 2 cows she milked every morning before sunrise. Some said she'd lost her husband to fever years ago. Others said he'd left her, taken the wagon and never looked back. No one asked. And she never offered the truth. When the millionaire cowboy stopped at her gate, she was standing there already, barefoot, apron dusted with flour, her hair in a braid that looked more like a forgotten rope than a style. She watched him silently as he struggled to speak. "My baby," his voice cracked. "She needs milk. I've been..." He couldn't finish. Clara looked down at the child, her eyes softening. "Come inside," she said quietly. He hesitated. The last time he'd entered someone's home uninvited, he was still rich, still proud, still thinking the world would always open its doors for him. Now, he felt like a beggar standing on the wrong side of mercy. "Please," she said again. "It's warm inside." Her cabin smelled of baked bread and wood smoke. The floor creaked beneath his boots as she took the baby gently from his arms. For a moment, he didn't breathe, afraid to let go, afraid she might vanish if he blinked. Clara didn't speak as she moved with quiet purpose. She took one of her cow's milk from a pan near the stove, warmed it gently, and found an old bottle from a shelf. The baby whimpered weakly as the smell reached her, then latched on when the bottle touched her lips. The sound of her drinking, soft, desperate, alive, broke something in him. He turned away, pressing his palms against his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Clara didn't answer. She only looked down at the tiny face against her arm, then back up at the man whose world had clearly fallen apart. "You can stay a while," she said softly. "She'll need more than one feeding." He stayed. At first, only for the night. Then 2. Then a week. Each day, the baby grew stronger, her cries turning into soft coos that echoed through the quiet cabin like a forgotten song. Clara would hum as she rocked the child, and sometimes, when she thought he wasn't watching, she smiled. The millionaire cowboy, whose name was Luke Grant, fixed her fences, chopped wood, and repaired her leaky roof. He didn't talk much. But when he did, it was usually about the past, how he'd once owned 500 head of cattle, how the fire had started one night while he was away on business, how he'd found his wife gone by morning. He never said the words "I failed them," but Clara heard them in every silence between his sentences. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, Clara found him sitting on her porch, the baby asleep on his lap. His eyes were on the horizon, haunted, searching for something that wasn't there. "You don't have to keep thanking me," she said gently, sitting beside him. He looked at her, then at the child. "I'm not thanking you," he said. "I'm wondering why." "Why what?" "Why you helped me." The town wouldn't even open their doors. Clara's hands rested on her knees. She stared at the fading light. "Because once," she said quietly, "I was the one begging for help. And no one opened their doors for me either." He didn't ask more. The pain in her voice told him the rest. As autumn crept closer, Luke started to notice things about Clara. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way her hands trembled slightly when she milked the cows at dawn. The way her eyes softened every time she looked at his daughter, as if she saw someone she'd lost long ago. The baby, little Ellie, had started reaching for Clara more than him. She laughed when Clara sang, quieted when Clara touched her cheek. And Luke realized, painfully and beautifully, that his daughter had found something he hadn't even been looking for. A mother's heart. But peace doesn't last long in places where pride and gossip travel faster than truth. By winter, the town was talking again. They said the millionaire had taken shelter with the widow. They said she was after his money. They said it was a scandal. When Luke went into town for supplies, people turned their backs. The blacksmith muttered something under his breath. The preacher frowned. Even Mrs. Beavers refused to sell him sugar. When he returned, Clara could see it in his eyes before he said a word. "You've been listening to them," she said quietly. "I can't let them talk about you like that." She shook her head. "Let them talk. They've been talking about me for years. It doesn't matter. It matters to me." That night, he stayed up long after Clara had gone to bed, the fire burning low as the baby slept beside him. He thought about leaving. About taking Ellie and finding another town, another start. But every time he imagined walking out that door, he saw Clara's face in the firelight, the only face that had looked at him without judgment, without fear. He couldn't leave. Not her. Not anymore. The next morning, a snowstorm rolled in from the hills. The wind howled like wolves, tearing through the valley. Clara's cows were frightened, trapped in the pen. Luke ran out into the storm to free them, his coat whipping behind him. He almost didn't make it back. When Clara found him collapsed in the snow, half frozen, she dragged him inside with a strength that came from somewhere deeper than muscle. She stripped off his wet coat, wrapped him in blankets, and pressed his shaking hands to her chest to warm them. "Don't you die on me," she whispered fiercely. "Not after all this." He blinked up at her through half-frozen lashes. "You're crying." "Of course I am, fool man," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You think you're the only one who's lost something?" When the storm passed, the world outside was white and silent. Luke woke to the smell of soup and the sight of Clara asleep beside his bed, her head resting on the edge of the mattress. For the first time in months, he smiled. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. "You're not dying," she said softly. "So you can thank me later." Spring came. The baby learned to crawl, then to laugh, her voice filling the small cabin with joy. The days stretched longer, brighter, softer. Luke repaired the barn and built a small crib out of oak. He started planting vegetables beside Clara's garden. Each night, they sat together by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, but always close enough to feel that strange, quiet comfort that comes when two broken people start to fit together. One evening, as fireflies flickered outside, Clara looked up from her sewing and said softly, "You ever think about rebuilding your ranch?" He nodded slowly. "Every day." "You could." He smiled faintly. "Only if you'd come with me." Her hands froze mid-stitch. The silence that followed felt like the whole world holding its breath. "Luke," she whispered. "People would talk. Let them." He reached over, gently taking her hand. "They talked when you helped me. They talked when you fed my baby. They'll always talk. But they don't know what it means to owe your life to someone, and to love them for it." Her eyes glistened in the firelight. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. They rebuilt the ranch together that summer. He used the last of his savings to buy lumber and livestock. Clara took care of the baby and the garden. The neighbors watched, whispered, and eventually, the whispers faded into something like respect. By autumn, the ranch stood proud again, a home reborn from ashes, built on something stronger than money. One night, Luke stood on the porch, holding Ellie in his arms as Clara joined him, her hand slipping into his. The stars were sharp and bright above them. "She's got your eyes," Clara said softly. Luke smiled. "She's got your heart." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in a long, long time, he felt whole. Years later, folks in town still told the story, but not as gossip anymore. They told it as a miracle. About the rich man who lost everything, and the quiet woman who gave him back his reason to live. About how love can grow in silence, how kindness can turn strangers into family, and how even the coldest nights can end in warmth if someone's willing to open their door. And sometimes, when travelers passed through the valley at dusk, they'd see a tall man and a woman in a white dress standing on the porch with a little girl between them, laughing, waving, alive. They'd ask, "Who's that?" And the old shopkeeper would smile and say, "That there's Luke Grant, the millionaire cowboy, and the woman who gave him her milk, and her heart." So tell me. If you were riding through that lonely town on a cold night, and you saw a desperate man with a crying baby, would you open your door? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if stories like this touch your heart. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's get started.